Hi, I'm Carys.
And I'm Nim Ralph.
We are on a mission to make sense of the news by asking why the media obsesses over some stories, ignores others, and how many comebacks does Tony Blair get?
This is Over the Top and Under the Radar.
Our co-host this week is Nim Ralph, a returning co-host because they were so brilliant. Nim is a writer, trainer, facilitator, and activist with about 20 years of organising experience in social movement, including trans and queer liberation, anti-racism, disability justice, and environmental justice. They co-founded QTIPOC London and the Purple Rain Collective, and they currently work at the climate change charity Stand. Hi, Nim. Welcome back. How does it feel to be a returning co-host?
Exciting. I love having a chat with you. And it's just funny when there's lots of other people listening in.
Yeah, it's like a private chat with us and thousands of other people. Okay, we've got to do it because we're in the UK and like we've both got, some British heritage. How you handling the heat, friend?
Do you know what? I'm a summer baby. I love it. I just wish that I didn't have to work.
Right? We should just get signed off work and be like allowed to be in the park. Yeah, my trouble is I live in a very new build flat with the windows that just really turn it into a greenhouse. Anyone watching the show on Spotify or other video platforms will see I have a very, very shiny face today. But I'm going to try and swim in the sea. That's my plan.
Whoa.
Sea swimming. Obviously, there's no sea in London. I'm trying to get out of London after this and swim in the sea, and then all will be right with the world.
You weren't being like full Londoner and calling the Thames the sea there.
No, and as a full Londoner, I'm not about to be swimming in the Thames. That's not a good idea.
Absolutely not.
No.
Especially with our water companies.
Yeah, I mean, there's all manner of things in there, isn't there?
I also have some good news to report back. I just remembered.
Yes.
So last time I was on, you might remember I talked about the Drax story.
Yes, that was the awful tearing down Canadian trees.
Yep, exactly. And since then, in March, they have begun to phase out burning forest biomass from Canada at its power station in the UK.
Oh my God, that's such a win.
Yeah, so we don't get them often. So I thought I wanted to bring that back to the audience here. That there was.
Yes, that's amazing. We'll put it in the newsletter.
We are still subsidising them at a horrific rate that I don't understand why it's not a national scandal. But
we're not killing all the beautiful old Canadian trees.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a win.
We are
take it.
They're phasing it out. So
okay, they're going to stop killing the trees eventually. Yeah, very corporate. They're like, we're going to stop at some point. Okay, just give us a little moment. But okay, that's a huge win. We'll link to it in the show notes. That is amazing. Good things can happen and do happen every day that we pay for. Okay, so Nim and I have taken a look at the news agenda. We've each picked one story we think the media has gone over the top on, one we think has flown under the radar. And this week I did just want to warn people about what's coming up. We're going to be talking about the guidance on single-sex spaces. We're going to be talking about rape and sexual assault. We're going to be talking about anti-pride violence. So some topics that might be upsetting, and we will also be talking about Tony Blair for a long time, which I know can irritate and upset others. And Nim, you're going to kick us off.
I am. And it will probably both surprise and not surprise anyone at the same time that I'm kicking us off with talking about the Supreme Court ruling on single-sex spaces. This isn't over, but not because I think that we're having enough good conversations about it, but because of the way it's been reported.
Okay, so people who are paying relatively close attention will know there was a Supreme Court verdict about single-sex spaces. So it was a case brought by, I don't know what we call them now, like gender-critical anti-trans activists to try and prevent trans people from accessing quote-unquote single-sex spaces, places like bathrooms. I think you last came on when that Supreme Court verdict had just come out, and now the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, which is like a government body, has issued guidance. So this is how we make this verdict real. This is what we're going to do. That's what came out this week, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so tell us, why is it over?
Because the right-wing media are reporting this as if what's just happened is that it's been made illegal for trans people to use toilets.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
I know.
Yeah,
we have to. It's like what
gallows
you
humor
laugh or you cry. Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, I would say that for trans people for whom, myself included, this has been really deflating, depressing. You start to question how much you can access public space anymore. But we are also talking about it, and so are our kinds of friends and allies talking about it as if this is done, it's finished, we've lost. And so what I've been really trying to do for the last few days in my despondency is challenge that thinking in myself to actually look at what is the guidance, what does it mean, and where do we still have power and scope to change things. And actually, like, it is more nuanced than it seems on the surface because of the right-wing reporting.
And so what is the guidance actually saying? Like, what has changed or what will change?
So, and this is, well, actually, the bit that I think is, if I'd have put this in the bit that I think is underreported is that I actually think the scariest thing about this is it has huge consequences potentially for all equality law. And that's the bit that we're not talking about.
Okay, so basically it's been one aspect has been over-reported, which is the toilet stuff, because everyone's obsessed with bathrooms.
Yeah.
But there's loads more in there that we aren't aware of.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, hit us? What's in it?
So what it claims to do is make things, provide clarity for service providers who want to provide a single-sex space, which is another way of saying, in practice, a trans-exclusive space, a space that trans people can't go to. What it's actually done is make it way more confusing. It's huge. It's something like 350 pages long. What it is doing is normalizing gender policing based on appearance and stereotypes. Something that has been dropped from the first draft version, which is good, is that there was a move to try and make people have to show their birth certificates at one point.
To use the toilet?
If you're challenged, yeah. And so that's been completely dropped, which obviously
is
sensible.
But we are introducing, just so that I'm clear, like a sort of challenge 21 for toilets. So for those who have not done bar work or worked in a shop that sells alcohol, if you think someone looks underage, specifically 21 or 25, it's called like challenge 21. So you challenge the person, and once you've challenged them, they have to prove they're old enough to buy booze. So we're going to do that, but we're going to be guessing who we think is trans and saying you can't use a bathroom unless you show me a birth certificate.
In practice, that is what it enables socially. That's not actually what this is.
Okay, but it creates a situation where someone could do that.
Yeah, it's like Brexit. It's like, it's not what it was, but it emboldened a bunch of things that came afterwards, that it creates that social context. So what this is supposed to do is give guidance to people who want a single-sex space. What it does in practice is exactly what you just said. I think that's a great way of framing it.
I mean, it's okay. There's so many things wrong with that. Like, just the idea that you can like visibly ID someone that's trans, which is just a whole lot of nonsense. Yeah, the idea that bathrooms need to become a place where people are like policing one another and interfering with one who's using, that's not great. Okay, tell me the rest.
Well, it also just gets really more confusing. The more you get into it, the more confusing it gets, because they're basically trying to say, you're allowed to have single-sex spaces, this is how you do it, but you're also not allowed to not provide spaces for trans people. They give lots of examples of like, here's how this could play out, and they get more and more confusing the more you go through them.
That's why it's 300 pages.
Yeah. So, for example, let's talk about toilets, because it's the thing we always talk about.
Okay, we'll do toilets, then we'll do some other stuff.
Yeah,
we've got to get beyond toilets.
Yeah, and it's an important point to go beyond toilets, because this is about domestic violence refuges. This is about hospitals. This is about places where we all need to use, including and especially trans people. But let's start with the toilets, because it's the easier one. So you're allowed to have a women's toilet and a men's toilet. If you are saying you are providing a single-sex space, i.e. a women's space or a man's space, what this now does is give litigious people the ability to take you to court if they think that that space is not single-sex. The interesting thing about it is the workaround here is really easy. It's don't call the toilets women's and men's. It's
okay.
Describe what's in them, urinals and cubicles, sanitary bins, accessible toilet, etc., or create gender-neutral toilet provisions.
Okay, so the problem comes about if you say this is a women's toilet, then you're creating a situation where someone will be like, well, I don't think it's a women's toilet. I saw someone that I think is trans in there. Okay, so if you don't designate the space a single sex space, then nothing kicks in. So, like,
Nothing kicks in.
my toilet in my flat is
Yeah.
gender neutral. That's fine. Okay, great. That's confusing and seemingly pointless. Continue.
Yeah. Lots of businesses and workplaces are now likely to go gender neutral, which will also cost them a lot of money, which is the other side of this no one's talking about, just to avoid lawsuits, which sounds inclusive, but it's not actually inclusion because it's just avoidance. It's saying we're going to remove gendered spaces entirely rather than figure out how to be trans inclusive. So we've just kind of created this situation where essentially trans people have become a third other, or like a third sex.
Okay, so far the people who are winning are the people that make bathroom signs because they're going to have to print a ton of new ones. Okay, buy your stocks. Okay, what
Yeah.
else?
So this last bit that I just mentioned is also really important in terms of trans people. It's kind of positioning us as a third sex or a third category of human. And what that does is sets a really dangerous precedent because it's creating a hierarchy of rights within the Equality Act where gender reassignment is weaker than other protected characteristics. So we're now saying that gender assignment is kind of weaker and lesser than sex-based protections. And that's not just bad for trans people. That's the bit where I think we're not talking enough about it. It's bad for the whole framework of equality law. Because at the moment, the foundational principle of the Equality Act and equality law is inclusion is default. And what this does is now creates exclusion as embedded into equality law.
There's a couple of things there that I think we've got to like sit with. And I think the first one is just like, this is so shit and it's so horrible. And I'm sorry you have to come on here and explain it. Yeah, I just think I know we have lots of trans listeners and people who love trans people as listeners and, you know, just listeners who care about this. And I think, yeah, I think it really sucks to have this stuff sort of codified. It sucks when the Supreme Court verdict came out and like it just is really bullshit now. I think it just flies in the face of any common sense. And you're right. Like we should care about this because we should care about this. And also, if for some reason you don't think you've got any skin in this game, like you're wrong because if they do it to one of us, they'll do it to all of us. Once you harm that precedent, once you undermine that legislation, you've undermined it for all of us. We're all less safe, we're all less free. I mean, it's a good over because again, it's one of those ones where the media just have one conversation they want to have. And like so many props to every person who's like been on a news channel, like answering silly questions about toilets. But it is really hard that it feels like an actual failure of reporting because people need to know what they're allowed to do, what other people might threaten to do. Also, I feel like it's just creating like a weird sort of like vigilante narc culture, which none of us should be in support of that.
That's it, exactly that. Is like creating a culture where we're all policing each other. And again, it's like trans people suffer most acutely, especially trans feminine people, but all women suffer in that. Like when we're being policed walking into gendered spaces.
And I think that's the thing is the policing of spaces rather than prioritizing safety. And we do have to remember this because this is an example of like right wing capture of a debate. It has been a deliberate strategy to peel off one section of the queer community and demonize them and like problematize them. And there is another way to talk about this, which is that bathrooms, streets, classrooms, everywhere should be safe spaces for all of us. No one should be unsafe or feel unsafe. No one should be sexually assaulted or harassed or harmed, like whatever body that they are in. And if that was the problem that we actually cared about and were actually trying to solve, these rules wouldn't solve that. Yeah, like it's really hard to see this stuff and like see that conversation and not hear enough people saying that other side of it. And then the media say what they say, politicians say what they say, and all these people that I don't want to lump everyone in together, but there's a lot of people who apparently care a lot about women's rights that I have not seen on any Reclaim the Night demos, like that I have not seen pushing for any action on violence against women in a broader sense. Like, yeah, it's kind of nonsense. And it also sounds like it's a hot mess.
It is, and it's a hot mess that trans people are going to suffer. And that's that's the hard part. And I guess, like, just to lift up that piece that I said before, which is that in theory, this is about how does somebody who wants to be trans exclusionary be trans exclusionary legally? Which, number one,
your how-to guide
is already fucked up. Like, the government is literally handing people the document to say, here's how you discriminate against a community legally. But number two, like, the other part of this is that now people who support us, people who don't care one way or another, they, exactly like you're saying, they care about safety. They're not thinking about the difference between trans women and cis women, or trans men and cis men, etc. And now also living as service providers in a state of fear about whether they have to change their business models, change their buildings. If they let trans people in, are they now going to get in trouble? And because of how this is being reported, it's compounding that effect where not only are we now already scared to go into spaces, but other people are scared to have us in their spaces because they don't also understand what the implications of us being there are.
Yeah, I mean, no one's about to be reading that 300-page document. Okay, but you did say, I want us to end on the optimistic note, because you said that there are things we can feel good about. So tell us.
Okay, so what the code doesn't say, this is a weird double negative. The guidance does not say that you can't provide trans inclusive spaces. So you can still provide trans inclusive spaces. And I think that's one of the things that we're missing in how we're talking about this publicly, that has a compounding effect on trans people's mental health. You can be trans inclusive, and I'm going to say that 12 more times.
Yes, there you go. So you can provide a trans inclusive space.
Yeah.
You 100% can. You can provide a space where anyone that identifies as a woman, anyone that identifies as a man, or just anyone can be. That is allowed. No one is stopping that.
That is allowed. It's basically saying if you call something a single sex space, you need to mean it. But also, like I said, you don't have to call it a single sex space. There's no law that says you have to call a toilet a woman's toilet and a man's toilet. So there are
already toilets that say urinals.
Exactly. There's lots
cubicles.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is that people already self-select into those toilets. You tell them what's inside it, they're gender neutral. People already self-select. The other thing that is important to note is it also says that in most situations, you can't deny a trans person a service either. So I know it's confusing, and this is where it all gets really confusing, but what it is not saying is you are allowed to de facto exclude trans people. It's saying you have to create some kind of provision for trans people in most situations. If, for example, you have a cafe and you currently have 2 toilets and one's a man's and one's a woman's, you can't just say, sorry, trans people, you don't exist here because you're a weird third sex. You have to either make them both gender neutral, or you have to come up with some other solution to this. You can't just say trans people can't use the toilets here.
Okay, so if you think this is nonsense, the best thing to do is to just provide gender neutral spaces, or be really clear these spaces are trans inclusive. So you're right, there's something potentially optimistic in that if we can like run with it.
Yeah, and it means that we have scope in that to push that to be actually trans inclusive and not just a byproduct. So, like, for example, I spend a lot of time in Vancouver for work. Like, a lot of the community gyms and spaces there have things like a third universal changing room that anyone can use. So they'll still have men's provisions and women's provisions, which I will say do serve a purpose. There are communities of people who want to be able to access separate sex spaces not out of prejudice, and that is fine. Their infrastructure is built with like a third space, which is also good for things like families, so that parents can take children in without having to go into different sex spaces together. Trans people have a space. It kind of creates more of a communal area in communal spaces, which is kind of cool. So there is scope here for us to also push that to be a progressive thing and not just a reaction to a regressive thing. Before we get to that stage, and more importantly, there is still a 40-day window to respond.
Okay.
And so something that people can do in this moment and take action really fast on is writing to your MP and asking them to push for full parliamentary scrutiny and debate on this, because it hasn't had it.
Is there an organisation running that campaign that we can direct people to, or could people just need to write a letter?
There's a few. Trans Solidarity Alliance, I think, have one. Scottish Trans have another one. So people have created, a lot of these are on Instagram. People have created templates you can copy and paste, and websites you can copy and paste and send these in to make it super easy.
We'll link to one of those. We'll link to that in the show notes so that people who can just like click through and do it.
But that's super important, because even if this gets passed and it becomes statutory, it says that like the people didn't just let this get rubber stamped. We won't roll over. we're pushing back. And also it deserves scrutiny. Like, why would we pass something that affects our lives this hard without that kind of scrutiny? If and when it does become statutory guidance, one of the really important things to remember about, and this is where it gets a bit technical, statutory guidance, is that it's all about interpretation. That the way that our legal system works is on precedents. And so right now, bad faith actors and right-wing commentators are controlling that narrative about what the interpretation of this guidance is. We can keep fighting for trans-inclusive readings of what's actually legal, and we have the room for that because this guidance is so confusing. And so there's a lot of room to argue for trans-inclusive interpretations of what they've put out that we need to not give up on. And so if somebody is taken to court and somebody says, you've done X, Y, Z, your defense can be, well, that's what the guidance said. Here's the guidance and what I read, and that's one. And we can create precedents through that. And that is definitely what the anti-trans lobby, they're going to be aggressively doing that and taking it to court to try and create precedent. The last thing is individuals can also make a difference here. We don't have to all have access to courts. Like you've already named a few ways that people can show up for trans people. I've also seen some really creative ways online, like people wearing badges and things that say, I might be trans or don't police my gender. Toilets. If you have trans friends and you're out in public, be clued into the fact that we're scared right now. We're scared to access spaces like toilets. Like, wait for us outside the toilet cubicles if we want you to, if we want that extra support, and visibly celebrate the good practices and challenge the bad ones when you see them.
A huge thank you to everyone who joined us on Patreon this week. Welcome. If you enjoyed today's conversation with Nim, we've recorded an exclusive bonus episode going out to our Patreon supporters on Monday. Patrons also get our weekly behind-the-scenes newsletter and access to the Over Under WhatsApp community. It's incredibly lively. There's always great chats about politics and things in the news. The podcast only exists because 350 of you choose to pay for it every month. That covers our basic production and nothing else. We need another 100 supporters so that we can do more. More episodes, sharper journalism, more of the stories that mainstream media won't touch. If you've been meaning to sign up on Patreon, please do it today. Patreon.com/overthetop under the radar. My over the top this week is a gentleman by the name of Tony Blair. Most will know him. He was Prime Minister of the United Kingdom for 10 years, 97 to 2007. Tony Blair wrote a 5,000-word essay. Don't read it because I read it for you. He trash talks net zero. He thinks AI is amazing, and he calls for, shock horror, a return to the radical centre rather than Labour going to the soft left. He has like quite a few shots fired at Labour, which like weird given he presumably is a member of the Labour Party, although I can talk. And yeah, like it's had loads of coverage. Pretty much every media outlet has like covered the essay, and then they've done like a dissection of the essay. And then he did like big media rounds. He was on BBC, he did a Times radio, he's out and about. And then obviously all the sort of Labour leadership contenders that aren't Labour leadership contenders because there's not a Labour leadership contest have kind of weighed in, where Streeting wrote a like Guardian opinion piece, which I kind of felt maybe it was written by AI. There were a couple of AI phrases in it. It didn't really say much other than I want to be leader of the Labour Party and I care about inequality. So Tony Blair's out here yet again. The comeback never ends. Don't call it a comeback. Here are the things I think that we are going over on. So like one, we should not be talking about Tony Blair this much. Yeah, he's not in office. And then the second thing, which he got asked about it on the Today programme, but I really do think we need to dwell on this a little bit more. Tony Blair famously has made a lot of money since he stopped becoming Prime Minister. People put his fortune at the sort of like tens of millions, maybe 60 million, could be 100 million. It's hard to know. He has this thing called the Tony Blair Institute. He used to have a consulting firm and a charitable arm. The most important thing to know about the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change is that it's dominated by one funder, Larry Ellison. So Larry Ellison is the founder of Oracle, a tech company which really likes AI. His son, you might remember, is trying to buy up various bits of the US media landscape. Larry Ellison is a right-wing dude who loves AI, who doesn't like climate change, who is pals with Trump, and like Just so that we're clear, a New Statesman investigation believes that Larry Ellison's foundation has donated or pledged £257 million to the Tony Blair Institute. And this injection of cash has also coincided with Tony Blair being more vocal about how AI is great, get out of the way, and how like climate change, net zero, oil and gas, let's go. I just feel like, how long does Tony Blair get to just like dominate the news agenda every time he has a sort of 5,000 word article? Like, bro, just put it on Substack like every other man. And then, yeah, why aren't we talking like yet again, something's happening and there's a billionaire behind it pumping cash into something, and then the person they're giving money just happens to say all the things that the billionaire thinks. So weird. What did you think about this rare intervention?
Yeah, I also thought it was funny that the media were calling it a rare intervention. It's
Are
like,
they still doing that?
it's like, who do you think we are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feels like weekly at this point. Like, I do think what he actually needs is a Substack or a podcast. Like, as someone with a lot of opinions, that's the way, Tony. That's the way. Just
Yeah.
get a podcast.
Yeah, and not to be conspiracy theorist about it, but I'm like, is the media interest here that you're funded by the same people as him? Or is it really just as simple as like, oh, you're stoking the fires of discordance within Labour, and that's the sport here and that's fun. So that's why it gets so much press.
You're right. You're right. Okay, you're right to point out there is sport, and the sport is is that like it's more conflict, more Labour leadership drama, which seemed to have died down. So there's a kind of fanning the flames of that. I think that, I don't know, I feel like that phrase centrist dads, which gets bandied about a lot, and I'm not using it in a pejorative way. I feel like a lot of people in the media with decision-making power kind of love New Labour, they're centrist dads. They kind of wish Tony Blair could just come back and Brexit could be over. And so they're just nostalgic for that time. And they don't think about the war in Iraq or, like top-up fees. They're just like, this is a man, he's like class interests align with mine. He's so well-spoken. And like, wasn't it all a lot nicer? And I'm not going to say it didn't feel a lot nicer under New Labour. I was a lot younger. I was a child. But yeah, things felt a bit more hopeful. But we can't go back, We can't go back.
And I actually think, I'm not a Burnhamite. I don't agree with everything that man says, but I actually think that his reply was really good, which was that centrism, I mean, that's kind of what he said that Blair took issue with, is that centrism and neoliberalism is part of what's got us into this mess, because the one thing that Tony Blair did not reference in his 57,000 word epic was
his novel.
Yeah, his novel was inequality. And it's like inequality is the defining factor of this moment, and polarization is the output of that. And Tony Blair's talking as if we're still in 1997, and we're not. My under the radar this week is a slightly complicated one. It kind of is not under the radar in that I think lots of people will have heard about it, about 3 teenage boys who have raped 2 different girls on 2 different instances, one at knife point, and videoed those instances. They have, in the last week, been given their sentencing. 2 of them were given a 3-year youth rehabilitation order and 180 days of surveillance and supervision. And the one slightly younger one has been given an 18-month youth rehabilitation order. And following a lot of public outcry on social media and across the internet, lots of prominent feminists in the broad church of feminism have also spoken out, including, for example, Jess Phillips, who was the Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls before resigning earlier in the month. Their sentences have now been referred back to the Court of Appeal for review following public outcry.
So basically the cases were horrible and they were found guilty, but they did not receive a custodial sentence, right? They weren't getting sent to prison or a young offenders institute. And now the case is being reviewed. So they aren't definitely going to prison, but...
No, it's gone to the court. The sentencing has been sent to the Court of Appeal for review. Yeah. And this is a difficult one to talk about. And it's obviously horrific. And it's hard to talk about this kind of violence and try to widen the scope of that conversation. But I also think that it's exactly in the complex areas that we should be having difficult conversations about things like, what does justice mean and why do we reach for the things that we reach for in these moments to feel like justice is served. And so I think what's been interesting here, I think there's different levels of what's going on here. One is, it seems strange to me that the internet can have, or the public outrage via the internet can have such an impact on a singular case, and what that means for justice and kind of public conversation and how we respond to violence. I also think that there's a bigger question that would be important to talk here about, like, what does justice really mean? Like, why is it that pushing for custodial sentences feels like justice in this moment? And I think there's a third part, which is that how do we talk about, and the kind of stepping through that conversation of what does justice mean, how do we talk about power and young men in this moment in the kind of realm of the manosphere and increasingly polarized political landscapes in ways that don't let people off the hook for perpetrating horrific violence, but also work towards community solutions and not hiding problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think it had flown under my radar until you mentioned it. I hadn't seen much coverage of it. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, right? It's a horrible, horrible crime. And yeah, I don't know. I don't like the criminal justice system. I'm not sure if I'm like a prison abolitionist. I think the hard thing about this is it's really hard to get a rape conviction. Going through the criminal justice system, if you've been sexually assaulted or raped, is like often very re-traumatizing for people. I'm less concerned about the sort of political posturing, because like politicians from all the parties, or like Labour, Tory, Reform, have all said this is terrible, this is awful. And like generally I just think politicians shouldn't be involved in sentencing. But yeah, I do think it's a tough one. Like, one of the boys has an extremely low IQ, which I think is like one of the factors in the non-custodial sentence. And there are some other mental health diagnoses. But yeah, I think it's hard if one of the victims talked about sort of like losing her innocence and her youth. And I think it is a tough one for those of us who maybe our instinct is like, we shouldn't be sending people to prison. Like, this does feel one where it's kind of a hard one, right? They did something awful, they filmed it. Like, yeah, shouldn't they be sent away somewhere? Shouldn't they be removed from the environment they're in?
Yeah, totally. And when I first read this case before the sentencing, like, my instinct was like, I hope that they get punished. Like, it's horrific, it's violent, it shows complete disregard for somebody else's humanity, it's all of those things. And as a survivor myself, like, knowing that we live in a system where you rarely get justice, you rarely get listened to, this is all happening within that landscape of us feeling like things rarely ever even get to court, and when they do, I forget the exact figure off the top of my head, but it's like 3% of cases get to convictions or something. And so, like, that is absolutely the context that we're sitting in. And what I am not trying to do here is like reduce the conversation to one that says prison is bad, therefore no one, like, it's wrong that anybody thinks that these people that these boys should have any kind of sentence. But what I do think is an important conversation to have is that why in these moments is that the only thing that we feel like justice can be served through? And why are we, when we know that that system doesn't work for us as survivors, why is it still the only thing that we feel like we can cling to get justice? And I think the broader conversation here is, what does real healing and accountability and reparation look like? And how do we have bigger conversations about that aren't about pretending that we don't live in the society and the system that we live in this moment, but do widen the scope a little bit away from that? Because I think when we're harmed, what we want people to do and say most of the time in moments that we're harmed is, you matter, you're cared about, and we'll protect you.
Yeah.
And in this conversation, it's like that equals, okay, the only way that can be true is if somebody goes to prison or there's custodial sentences. And I just think that's part of the conversation, and that's part of the system that we live in. And just to be clear, if that was my child or me, like, I'm sure I would call the police in that instance. Like, this isn't about passing moral judgment on people for wanting to do that. That is the system that we have available to us in this moment. But why can't we in progressive spaces have bigger conversations about what real healing and accountability looks like?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things, because there is the experience that victims go through if they choose to report. And obviously, a lot of people do not choose to report with a good reason. And you have this process that can be re-traumatizing and horrible, and that you're not set up for success, and you go through it. And I can see at the end of it, you would be like, and to be like blunt, if it was someone I cared about, I'm like, yeah, lock this person up, because it's not just about what they did, it's about what they're going to do again. But yeah, I wonder, like, the thing I think that is really missing is like, what's the support for the victim through that process and after that process? Because then you're just left alone with like locking them up won't make that not have happened. I think the other thing is that this type of sexual violence, and like all sexual violence, is very common. What are we doing about the fact that like young boys are like making rape pornography? Like, they're not just raping people, they're making porn about it, essentially, or videos. And they're like in groups doing this stuff because it's not that shameful. Like, that is what I would love politicians to focus on, rather than sentencing of individual cases and like grandstanding.
Exactly. And I think that there's like, that's kind of exactly what I think is the broader conversation we could be having, is how do we get to places where, one, we have a society where this is less common, and two, what conditions do we need that we don't currently have to support different modes of justice that prevent it happening again when we get there? And I think that forces us to look at, we don't have some of those preconditions, and that is where the bigger conversation comes in.
My under the radar, I have only seen on Facebook and the BBC, so I think it is a true under the radar. Maybe it'll get picked up by some other people. A Pride music event in Hertfordshire has been cancelled due to safety concerns. So the event is called Loud and Proud. It was going to be the first ever event. It was happening at a venue called Shirley's Roadhouse. There was going to be live music, cover acts of like Christina Aguilera, Elton John, Britney Spears tributes, all the greats. But basically, despite selling 100 tickets, organisers cancelled the event because their banners kept getting torn down. Basically, they just couldn't be sure that the event would be safe, so they cancelled it. There is still a Hertfordshire Pride event scheduled to take place in August. But yeah, I wanted to talk about this because it's awful, but I think it's also part of a couple of bigger trends. So one is this like rise in anti-LGBTQ sentiment, mostly directed at the trans community. This idea that people can just like multiple times like tear down the pride flags, I think is pretty awful. I respect the organisers' right to decide that the solution is to not hold the event, but like I think we should all be worried about that. And then I think the second thing is it is a little bit of a part of a broader trend where I think pride has gone from a protest, like a social movement in many ways, to something that then became almost co-opted, like famously sort of corporations and the police. And now it looks like actually we're getting a bit of a swing back. UK Black Pride got cancelled for 2026. They are going to bring the event back next year, but like there's been a lot of talk about the fact that sponsorship has dropped off. So yeah, I wanted to talk about pride, the importance of pride, and also how scary it is that we're living in a country like in 2026 where some like vandals and like the threat of violence means that now queer people don't feel they can be loud and proud and like organize, and you're depriving people of Britney Spears covers, and that's just wrong. It's just wrong. You know where I stand on that, Nim. Yeah, had it like what do you had you fly under your radar? Like, do you feel like it is a bigger trend?
It had completely flown under my radar till you shared it with me. I do think it's part of a bigger trend, and I actually think it's like weirdly a kind of summary of the wider trends from the last three stories we've just talked about. I think, like you said, it speaks to rising animosity towards LGBTQ people, but particularly through the attack on trans people and us being used as kind of a political football in a wider political discourse that symbolizes something that threatens masculinity, that threatens traditional values and all of these things that feed into the story we just talked about around how the felt disempowerment of kind of boys and men is being harnessed by the right into unhelpful vehicle or violent vehicles for feeling powerful, which is like the ripping down of these posters. And I also think it speaks to Blairism.
Say more, speak on it. You know, I'm here for that.
I know that you hate his name being evoked in multiple conversations, but
come on, say his name, say his name. Maybe he'll appear on the podcast.
I do. I do think that like the LGBTQ community, particularly the LG community, for the last 20 years has kind of become so liberalized that, yeah, like not to be too cliche, but like pride should be a protest. Like if we're living in a town where people are ripping down our flags, we should be out louder. That is the point of pride. Pride is about going out and saying, fuck you, I'm still a human, even if you don't want me. And
it's claiming space, right? It's like a Reclaim the Night march, or like, and it's claiming space and taking out space and like saying like, this is my space. I have a right to exist in this space how I want, with like fucking tiny sequin hot pants or like whatever I want to wear, however I want to be. It's okay. And like, I'm not going to wait for you to tell me it's okay. I'm going to be here.
Exactly that. And I think the liberalization of the kind of LG plus agenda since the Blair years means that I think we even have a generation of people younger than me who think that pride is just about us going out and having a nice time because people love us, not that it was an act of defiance because people didn't love us. And like, that's beautiful. I wish that's what pride was, but I also think that now's a moment for us to go back to who we are as a community and stand up for ourselves and each other. And that's not a personal critique of the organizer of this. Like, it's not on one person to do that. If one person can't hold down the safety of a community, it's for us collectively to stand together and do that together.
Like, basically channel Tony Blair and take up space. Like, we need to just like put ourselves in the head of Tony Blair, a man who took us into an illegal war, messed up a ton of stuff that we're all paying for now, did nothing on inequality, brought in a student loan system that mean like loads of young people are in debt, promised them if they went to university they'd get good jobs, and then the jobs are gone. And does Tony Blair wake up in the morning and be like, no one needs to see me, no one needs to hear from me? No, he does not. Tony Blair looks in the morning, he said, people want a 5,000 word essay from me and I should do television. And that is what we have to channel right now. We've got to pretend we're Tony Blair and be like, we deserve to be here, we should take up space, we are valuable and precious and beautiful.
Not you telling the queers to be more Blair.
Cancel me, 100% cancel me. Yeah, like I'm making light of it, but I do think it, like, I think that is, yeah, the stakes are high. And yeah, I think it's also a reason of like we need these intergenerational relationships on the left, right? Because we've got to reclaim and remember our history, and that pride wasn't set up by Starbucks.
I feel like this demands that we reinterrogate what belonging means, because I think this is the outcome of 20 years ago, a large part of the lesbian gay lobby who wanted to be normal and accepted by the institutions that dehumanized us, that like that sponsored, like, oh, they'll sponsor us, they love us now, oh, they'll let us sit on their local community policing panel, they love us now, all of these things. And it's like, no, that's not how we build community power and strength. That's not how we find belonging as queer people. Like, we don't adapt to the system needs to adapt to us.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like we've done a job. You were a great co-host as ever. I nearly melted, but we kept the show on the road. Any people who have listened to you and want to like know more, find out about you and your work, where should they go to follow you?
You can follow my dormant Twitter account, which is at NMRLPH.
Thank you so much for joining me, Nim, and thank you for listening.
Bye.